Okay, hello everyone. I'm here today with Michele Worden, who'll need no introduction. We've done several sessions with Michele previously. We got a certain way through answering questions that have been submitted by viewers, but we still have several left. So we're going to answer some of those questions. And also, at the time that we're recording this, I don't actually know when this will go out, but at the time we're recording this, a lot has happened in a very short period of time. So we're going to maybe discuss some of those things as well to begin. But firstly, let me just say hello to Michele and thanks for joining us, Michele.
Hi, Chris. How are you? Thank you for
Yeah,
having me back on.
my pleasure. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well.
Good stuff. So I think we need to, as I say, at the time we're recording this, this may go out quite a long way into the future. So you just have to imagine if you're watching this that it's the end of January. Um, we've had a lot of stuff that's happened in a very short period of time. Firstly, the Crown Prosecution Service has neglected to take these cases that we thought were pretty dubious any further. Then there has been this thing about the coronial process, an inquest, the coroner's reopening the cases, which seems curious. And then also there's at the time we're recording this, the Netflix trailer has come out, and possibly by the time this is released, the entire documentary will have come out. But let's talk about the CPS cases first. So I always thought that this wouldn't make court. Do you have any thoughts on that whole thing? Anything you have to say about it, really?
I agree. I always thought that it would never make court because some of the rumors circulating these cases was that Lucy had dislodged the endotracheal tubes. And that's ridiculous because babies dislodge their ET tubes all the time. I found it quite amusing that after the announcement that the CPS was not pursuing further charges, Dr. Dowie Evans, who was the main prosecution expert during the first trial, who had very much pushed the narrative that it's highly unlikely babies would dislodge their ET tubes, all of a sudden has done a complete U-turn and says, oh, he's not at all surprised that the CPS are not pursuing further charges because it would be very difficult to demonstrate that Lucy had dislodged these tubes. Well, that's a complete contradiction to what he said in the first trial. It's also a complete contradiction to what Dr. Ravi Jayram said in the baby K trial, where he very clearly said it's highly unlikely that a 26-week gestation baby could dislodge their ET tube. Well, that's just not true. Babies wriggle. They are not sedated the way a child is in intensive care or an adult. They might have pain relief on board, but they're certainly not paralyzed. And therefore, they wriggle and they move, and it's very, very easy to dislodge an ET tube. So, no, I agree. I was not at all surprised the CPS have made that decision. And I think also part of that decision-making process probably was because of all the information following the trials that has now come out. The CPS are not going to risk having another trial of the magnitude of the first trial with knowing that Mark MacDonald, Lucy's new barrister, has a whole squad team of highly experienced neonatologists who would just eat the prosecution alive in court. So no,
Absolutely.
I wasn't at all surprised about that.
What did you think about what Cheshire Police had to say about the decision of the Crown Prosecution Service?
Well, that's quite shocking, really, because Cheshire Police coming out and formally saying that they're very disappointed. I think they were just trying to defend their guilty narratives. But they would have been in a very difficult position because would the prosecution actually have now had any expert witnesses to defend their corner? We know that Dr. Dowie Evans has been completely discredited, as has Dr. Bowen, as has Prof. Hindmarsh. The pathologist that they use, Mama Aides, is not, he completely overruled the pathologist who actually performed the PMs, and that's unheard of. So I don't think the prosecution actually would have had any experts. So who would they have used? Whereas the defence would have had a whole squad team of people saying this is nonsense.
Mhm.
And the CPS and the police know that, but the police just want to keep the guilty narrative going.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. So we were having a little chat before we started recording about this coroner's thing, and I think it's fair to say I know nothing about this at all. I knew nothing about it until I spoke to Stephanie, and I know it's not your area of expertise, but we both think it's interesting. So what do you think about the coroner and them having an inquest now, and also about Lucy having representation at this process?
Okay, well, I really know very little about what happens in inquests and how the system works. The preliminary hearing has been set for the 4th of February, which is relatively soon. It's what, 2 weeks away, less than that, probably. So I think the police and the parents' lawyers were pushing the coroner long before the CPS made the decision not to pursue further charges, because it's in their interest to keep the guilty narrative going. If the death certificates of these poor tragic babies is changed to unlawful killing, that then also opens the floodgates for criminal compensation for these parents. So their lawyers are always going to push for a change. The coroner, I would presume, I don't know who the coroner is, but she's now in the same very difficult position as Lady Justice Thirlwall, where the date's been set for a preliminary hearing to look at these opening inquests into these babies. If she changes the certificates and then down the line Lucy is exonerated, does she have to go back and change the death certificates back to what they state now, which is natural causes? I think she's between a rock and a hard place, because she's probably having a lot of pressure from Cheshire Police and the parents' lawyers, but she also knows exactly what is going on. We're still waiting for Lady Justice Thirlwall's report, which has been kicked down the road. We know that Mark MacDonald has submitted to the CCRC, and we're waiting to hear if they kick that back to the Court of Appeal. Then if it goes to the Court of Appeal, there will be a whole very, very lengthy hearing. And will the Court of Appeal recommend that there is another trial? So the coroner is actually in a very difficult position. I think she will open this hearing and then, like Lady Justice Thirlwall, kick it down the road to see exactly what happens.
Yeah, I think both the Thirlwall inquiry and the coroner are in a difficult situation, as you rightly say. My dog wants to come up. So you can see Keiko. Keiko's familiar to many viewers, so she's joining in today. She's just a bit clingy today. I don't know what's
Yeah.
wrong with her. She obviously got too wet when we went for a walk. You're right, Bill. You have to
Yeah,
stay.
weather's not very good, is it?
It's terrible. Getting soaked every day. Yeah, so I mean, people ask me, what do you think is going to happen with the coroner? And also quite often, what do you think is going to happen with Thirlwall? I just say, I've got absolutely no idea, because she's in such a difficult situation now where she said these rather ill-advised comments about noise at the start of the inquiry. And now to be fair, to her credit, Lady Thirlwall has backed away from that significantly. Her comments at the end were much more measured.
Yeah.
But she still said, let's continue with the thing that we're doing. And Lord only knows what she can do in terms of recommendations. But I mean, I've received kind of tacit indication that officially they're still intending to follow the timetable. So we'll just have to wait and see. But it just seems, I mean,
Well,
do
the
you?
timetable's been kicked down the road. I mean, she was
Mm,
going to take a report in December, then it's now Easter. I can't see her actually making a report in Easter. And of course, She knows that in the very beginning, numerous real experts wrote saying you have to change the terms of reference. And at the time, she refused. Who knows whether she regrets that decision now? Because how on earth can you write a report based on guilt when, as she put it, there is serious noise, in fact, screams about whether this is a miscarriage of justice and the quality of evidence that was presented in court by so-called experts who are now being discredited.
Mm. So
So,
another thing that people have raised, Michelle, that's really important is that we know now that there were massive problems at this hospital. So you can't just say, oh well, that just gave Lucy Letby a pretext to take advantage of the. I mean, that's just ludicrous.
yeah.
There needs to be some very serious kind of official statements made about the problems with the hospital, obviously.
And also, what has also happened is that we knew about problems within maternity because Donna Ockenden has been investigating Shrewsbury and Nottingham. But now there has been huge screams about Leeds, about Oxford. All these maternity hospitals are in absolute crisis. And I believe that Chester was no different. The only difference in Chester was they pointed the finger at a nurse. We know that in Chester they had an appalling maternity review in 2020. So it's not a quantum leap to think that they had appalling maternity care during this indictment period. And certainly we know that from many of the babies on the indictment that went to trial. And again, the all knowledgeable Dr. Dowie Evans said to the police, "Oh, we don't need the maternity notes." Well, the police should have said, "Well, actually, you're not an obstetrician, so we do need the maternity notes." But yet again, it was another failing in the entire investigation and in the trial. And I know that Mark MacDonald is now trying to rectify that. And in his reports to the CCRC, he has obstetricians of very great eminence calling out what happened to these babies antenatally.
Yeah.
So it's just another, I mean, as you rightly say, the hospital had numerous problems. There's sewage, there's sewage coming through the ceiling. It's just a mess. And the government knew that because they gave Chester 110 million to open and build a whole new women and children's, which opened in September 2025. And the hospital knew that there was problems. That's why they had Lucy heading up the baby grow appeal. But none of this was told to the jury. The jury were not told any of these problems. So the evidence that was presented in court, God love the jurors. I'm not surprised they convicted her, but they literally didn't even have half the story. There were so many aspects that they were denied the knowledge of knowing.
And we know now that Dr. Evans he simply did not look for these things. He's quite deliberately, I think it's fair to say, avoided looking at anything to do with infection, anything to do with the hospital, anything to do with critical reports, anything to do with poor practice by the doctors. I think it's a combination. I mean, it'd be interesting to ask you this question, Michelle, actually. So obviously a lot of us have focused, and I think quite rightly, on the fact that Dr. Evans had a preconceived view of what he was going to do, and he was going to, write reports that said there was malfeasance. But he also makes this comment at one point where he says, "Oh, the paediatricians will be right." Words to that effect. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. So what I wanted to ask you is, like, he's someone in the past who he signed this thing about Roy Meadow. So he signed this letter saying, "Oh, Roy Meadow's fine," basically.
Yeah.
Do you think it's like a cultural thing where he just thinks, or this could be a contributing factor where he thinks, "Oh, well, the paediatricians, if they've got concerns, they will just automatically be correct." Do you think that could be a contributing factor?
I definitely think that would be a contributing factor. But in fairness to Dowie Evans, and I never thought I'd be defending him, the consultants withheld information from him.
Mm.
He is on record, I think it was on the Tortoise interview, saying he was never told that there was problems with sewage, there was problems with the water, that the taps were growing pseudomonas.
Mm.
And he said that if that, I think the interviewer asked him and said, what would you do if that happened on your unit? And he said, I would have shut it down. But nobody told him about Chester's
Mm.
problems. So really, this all goes back to how you sell a story. And the real story came from Dr. Steve Breary and Dr. Ravi Jairam. And from the word go, I think they were very, very selective on the information they gave to the police, to Dowie Evans. Certainly, we know they were very selective on the information they gave to the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. And the police allowed those two to be the accusers, the investigators, and then main witnesses in the trial, which is quite staggering on many levels
Oh, this
that
is
that's allowed to happen.
completely inappropriate.
So,
This shouldn't happen.
although I don't agree with the majority of stuff that Dr. Evans said, he was equally kept in the dark about certain aspects of what was actually happening on this unit.
So I agree with what you're saying. One thing I will say in response to that is that, as he specifically said, I don't want to see previous reviews and reports. Would he have paid attention to it anyway? That would be my question. Um,
Well, we'll never know that. That's
no, it is
hypothetical.
hypothetical.
But I do think that Steve Breary and Ravi Jairam were very selective with who they said what to and when.
Yeah.
They really were focused on pointing the finger at Lucy, and so was John Gibbs. He was the clinical lead, so he's ultimately responsible. None of them were open and honest with everybody. It's well, we'll say this to that person and we'll say this to that person, and we just hope that nobody joined the dots. And of course, they went through a trial and she was convicted, and they never in a million years thought that anybody would call any of this out. They never thought that neonatologists or biochemists or statisticians or anybody was going to come back and call them out about the evidence or the reports that they had written or the information they put out there. So they thought they were on the home run. And since then, so many real experts have come out and said, well, this is all about how you sell a story. And they told a very good story on their own narrative to one person and then to another person. They were not open and honest and transparent at all. And I suspect that they also weren't honest and transparent with the police. They told one story to the police because they were angry that management wasn't listening to them.
Mm. Well, I mean, they identified Lucy in
Yeah.
in their meeting. I mean, there's just no. They might as well just have said, "We think it's Lucy Letby," because they made it absolutely clear who they suspected, and the police couldn't possibly have been under any illusions as to who it was. So,
Well, they
yeah.
were certainly saying that behind closed doors because we know that the junior doctors were chatting about it. And of course, Jim McCormack, at one of the meetings with Ariane Powell in 2016, Easter 2016, which was long before the police were involved, stood up and said, "You're harbouring a murderer."
Mm.
So if Jim McCormack, who's a consultant obstetrician, knew it was Lucy Letby, then hospitals are very good at gossip and rumours, and it's everybody probably knew the finger was being pointed at Lucy, and that's why Jim McCormack had to write a letter of apology to her, which was a very non-apology of, "I'm really sorry I said inappropriate things, but I didn't actually name you, but everybody knew it was her." I mean,
Yeah,
it's just nonsense.
yeah, it's totally wrong. I mean, it is going back to what you said earlier. It is very clear that things were kept from these reporting bodies such as the Royal College. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but in the Thirlwall documents for when the Care Quality Commission were visiting, there is a proforma in which there are various things noted. Pseudomonas is noted. There's noting of sepsis. There's this bliss thing. There's the is it called news, like early warning score? Like, I forgot what it's
Yeah.
an acronym. You will know, Michelle. Um, and then that just the Care Quality Commission report just does not reflect that at all. So I wonder if they saw that and thought, right, well, the next time someone comes around, we need to stage manage this more carefully, because the Royal College was a lot more critical, but the lot of these contextual things that we know about now were not included. So I
Well, if
think,
you take the Royal College report, one of their recommendations was they needed two ANNPs. Now, that whole report reads that as if Chester had never had ANPs. And I don't think anybody involved in that inquiry, John Gibbs, Ravi, Steve Brewery, they all knew that Chester had two ANPs and we would dispense with. Excuse me. But they didn't tell the Royal College that. So the Royal College made recommendations. I think if they'd have told them and said in cost cutting, all these senior nurses were dispensed with, the Royal College would have said this is incredibly short-sighted. And but it's obvious they didn't tell them. So they hid loads of things. That's just one aspect.
yeah,
Sorry.
that's okay. You have a drink, that's no problem.
Yeah.
Have you finished your answer?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's fine. I just want to check.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. So let me just ask you out of interest. Obviously, we know that when the ANNPs were dispensed with, including yourself, that was a cost-cutting measure. But,
Well, they
but
didn't say it was cost
yeah, well, that's what I
cutting.
was going to ask you. How was it justified at the time?
Right. Well, it was justified because the unit, following the Department of Health white paper in 2003, these regional neonatal networks were set up. And at the time, not just Chester, but lots of hospitals within the region and across the country were taking all categories of babies with the exception of surgery. Surgery always went to Liverpool Women's because we don't have a surgical unit, a paediatric surgical unit. Following those reviews in 2005, Chester, Crewe, Southport, and Warrington were deemed to be level 2 units. So they were not to take babies less than 27 weeks, whereas in the past we'd taken all gestation babies. Arrow Park was deemed to be a level 3 unit, but in fairness to Arrow Park, it is more like a level 2 plus unit because they also do not have surgery.
Right.
So surgery goes to Liverpool Women's, although the actual surgery is performed in Alderhay. They did have surgical cots. So it becomes a bit complicated, all these designations. And Macclesfield and Southport and Wiston were, I'm not sure about Southport actually, but certainly Macclesfield and Wiston were designated to be level 1 units. So they take babies only above 32 weeks. Sorry, I've forgotten the question. What were you saying?
Oh, well, we know what justification did they give?
So, yeah, so the justification once that happened was that we weren't going to have sick babies. And at the time, I argued with the senior nurse that that was a ridiculous stance because babies can be seriously sick even if they're born at term. But the hospitals were in crisis and they wanted to save money. And the easiest way to save money is to get rid of nursing staff. And of course, there was 8 of us that by various methods, I was the only one who was served compulsory redundancy because I wouldn't play ball with them. So via the Royal College of Midwives, we sort of put them a bit into a corner. So that's how I ended up with redundancy. But all sorts of things were used, as in restructuring, regrading, downgrading, Mars, which is a system to get people to retire early. There was a whole host of different methods. And then, of course, and that happened between 2006 and 2009, that the 8 senior staff were dispensed with. I was served redundancy in 2007, but it was really all about cost cutting, because then in 2010 they realised, oh, we've got no staff, so they employed 8 nursery nurses. Now, nursery nurses definitely have a role to play, but they should be there to enhance the care of a registered nurse, not to replace a registered nurse. And nursery nurses can't look after intensive care babies or high dependency babies. So it came together as a perfect storm. And then in 2012, of course, they employed 2 newly qualified registered nurses, one of whom was Lucy Letby. But by 2015, Lucy is deemed to be senior. You tell me a profession where you are deemed to be senior after only 3 years post-grad. You wouldn't be a head teacher. You certainly wouldn't be a consultant. You wouldn't be a barrister. You wouldn't be a top architect or engineer. But in nursing, that seemed to be okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you some questions from viewers, and this kind of leads me neatly into this question. So this person has written, also taking into account how unhappy staff are about the AAs and PAs taking on tasks they're not qualified for, whilst doctors can't get jobs and have to move across the country to take employment they can get. This is the fault of political leaders wanting to completely privatise the NHS and leave a small minority for the people who can't afford insurance. I won't read the last sentence, but I don't disagree with what you're saying. And the other thing, in addition to that people often mention to me is trusts and the way that the system has changed. Now, I don't know very much about this, but perhaps you could just talk a little bit about what the statement this person has made here, and also the way that the organisation, the NHS, has changed and how that has had an impact.
Well, I can only talk about what my friends have told me, because you've got to remember I've been out of this now since
Sure.
2007. But certainly, I think it started long before my redundancy with the introduction of trust hospitals, which then made healthcare very competitive between other hospitals. And the way the money was distributed also at the same time changed, because it became under coding and the money went to the patient rather than to the hospital. So hospitals had to attract patients in order to receive funding, rather than in the past, hospitals were given a budget and they could decide internally, locally, what services they wanted to provide. With the introduction of trust, that all changed. And I suppose in a way it was the start of an insidious way of introducing private companies. Definitely there was privatisation was introduced by the back door under the Labour government of the time, Tony Blair. And it's just progressed since, that if you don't attract a patient, then you don't get funding. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, really. Again, with these structures of the neonatal unit, the sickest babies were going to 2 hospitals within Mersey region, which is Arrow Park and Liverpool Women's. So the money was going there. The money wasn't coming to the other hospitals as it had in the past. And then ANNPs, I mean, I was one, so I'm probably going to be classed as biased, but I think they're a very important part of the workforce, because registrars are only on a unit usually for 6 months and then they rotate somewhere else. Junior doctors, such as residents or SHOs as they used to be called, are only there for 3 months. So ANNPs are a constant force within that working environment, in that speciality. They know the protocols, they know the guidelines, they write a lot of them. They are a teaching resource, they are a mentorship resource. So they have a valid place, but they were always supervised under the umbrella of the consultants. The consultants' roles have changed as well. And certainly when you look at these now physician associates, I think it is about cost cutting. Physician associates like ANNPs should not be there to replace the medical team. They should be there to enhance the medical team. But unfortunately, due to cost cutting, these roles are being implemented to replace medics. It's no different than if we go back to the nurses, registered nurses being replaced with nursery nurses, or registered midwives being replaced with maternity support workers. The list goes on. All of these categories should be there to enhance the roles of the medics or the registered nurses, not to replace them under cost cutting. And it's the same with, also you have to look at the training. So I'm a registered nurse. When I qualified, I worked for 3 years as a staff nurse. Then I went to do my midwifery, which was 18 months postgrad. Then I worked as a midwife for a year before I went to work on the neonatal unit. I worked on the neonatal unit for 18 months before I went to do my QIS training. I then came back and worked as a staff nurse for another 2, 3 years before I went to train to become an ANNP. So I had over 10 years experience under my belt before I undertook the ANNP training. Now, when you look at Lucy, Lucy was qualified. She went to do her QIS training 18 months after qualification, and then she was deemed senior. And I've heard people saying that ANNPs are now being trained after 3, 4 years. If what happened to Lucy hadn't happened, she probably would be an ANNP by now. I mean, certainly 10 years down the line, but she probably would have been sent in 2016, 17, when she was only 5 years post-grad, not over 10 years post-grad. So it's the level of experience that is also being cut back. And that's the only way a lot of nurses can now have a career structure. Because back in the day, you would have, when I first went to work on the neonatal unit in Chester, we had at least 8 what would be the equivalent of band 7s as sisters. Now they've got 2. So that's clearly indicative how everything's being cut back. There's no career structure.
Can I ask you about the bands in nursing? So you have like band 5, band 6, band 7. Not uncommon in any kind of hierarchical organization. But can you kind of explain to us what would be the different responsibilities and what do the bands determine exactly?
Well, the bands were supposed to introduce different levels of experience and different grades. So a nursery nurse, depending where you are, and this is a problem, in some hospitals, a nursery nurse will be graded a band 2 or 3. In Chester, they were graded a band 4. It's written into requirements of nurse training that if you're a registered nurse, you start on a band 5. Midwives start on a band 6 because they're deemed to have more responsibility. But these bands were introduced in every single role across the trust, and they are a disaster, in my opinion. So you've got, say, Ariane Powell, who was the manager of the neonatal unit, highly qualified, been in neonatal nursing for over 20 years. She's the manager, and she's a band 7. And then you've got somebody in the fundraising office who has no qualifications, no university education, but is a good fundraiser, and they're also a band 7. How do you think that makes a registered nurse feel?
Hmm. Hmm.
The whole system is just wrong, completely wrong. And I also know, I mean, nurses are just demoralized. I know 2 nurses who were band 7s, and then because they had young children, asked if they could go reduce their hours. So they reduced their hours, and the hospital trust said, "Oh, well, okay, if you're reducing your hours, we'll allow you to reduce your hours because we understand you've got childcare, but now you've got to be a band six, but still do the same job." Whenever you approach, they cost cut.
Mm.
Why should, just because you're going part-time and you're doing the same job, should you be downgraded by a whole grade from a band seven to a band six? But I know two nurses that that's happened to. One's a midwife, and I'm quite sure it can be replicated in every department, in every hospital across the country, because it's all about the money.
It's interesting because I used to work in the civil service. I'm having horrible flashbacks to my previous life, but only for a few years. But it's very difficult to get downgraded anyway. Uh, it's not impossible, but typically you just get your grading and that's it.
Well, that's
Um,
in the
obviously, it's not like that in nursing.
it doesn't happen in the NHS at all.
How do
Um,
you feel about the system of bands then? Is it a good way of?
when the gender changed, which is what it was initially called, I thought it was quite good, but the reality has proved to be very different. And as I say, I know nurses who I have, a very good friend who was a very senior labour ward sister who was a band seven, highly experienced. She's got 30 plus years of experience being a labour ward sister. And when she came to retire, you can do this thing about going back retirement, but still do 2 days a week. She was also told, "Oh, yes, of course you can come back, but again, you're going to come back on a band six." And she said, "Well, then don't put me in charge of labour ward." And they went, "Oh, no, you've got the experience. You have to come back on charge of labour ward." And she, in fairness, stood her ground and she maintained her band seven. But that conversation should not be happening. If you've got that level of expertise, you shouldn't be downgraded. I think
I agree.
if you're downgraded, it should be because there is concerns about your clinical practice
Mm.
because you're going part time.
Yeah, well, I mean, that really surprises me as an outsider. Of course, I've never worked in the NHS, and I've learned a lot about it. But my assumption would have been, based obviously on my experience in previous in in different fields, is that the band is a recognition of your skill level and experience, and that can't change. Just well, unless, as you say, you demonstrate you're not good enough. But surely
No,
that
no,
would
but they get around it because it's all about restructuring. I mean,
be.
when I'm going through my negotiations, because the first thing that happened when they came to me in 2007 was, we're restructuring, Michelle. The unit's now going to be a level two. We're not going to have as many sick babies, so therefore we're going to change your job description. And I was a band 8B, and they said, we're going to make you a band seven, which is 2 grades below. But I knew, because I knew that they knew that I had a level of skills and that they would downgrade me under the guise of restructuring to a band seven, but there it would slowly and insidiously come back that I ended up doing the job that I was doing as an ANNP, but under a different job title. They'd probably call me senior sister or something.
Mm.
That's the way it would happen. And I refused to play that ball. I said, no, I'm not taking a band seven. And they said, okay, well, you've made yourself redundant then. And I called in the unions at that point.
Mm.
And the union said, oh, you can't do that to her because she's actually negotiating. And Michelle has agreed to be downgraded to a band 8A from a band 8B. You need to negotiate. And they said, no, we don't want any band 8s. They're too expensive. So that's how then the union said, well, in that case, you're not prepared to negotiate or meet her halfway. So you have to serve her compulsory redundancy. And that's how my compulsory redundancy came about. But other nurses who went through that process took the band seven. Some of them left. One of them took Mars. one of them was sidelined into another department where she ended up, ironically, fundraising for her own salary. And that's how they got around it. And it's still going on today. As I say, one of my friends who's a very senior Labour Board manager took retirement, wanted to come back on 2 days a week, and they said, yes, but you have to now come back on a band 6. And she said, well, fine, I'll come back as a midwife, but you're not putting me in charge of Labour Board. And they said, oh, no, no, you have all the skills. We want you still to run Labour Board.
Wow.
And she fought it. In fact, I think she called in the unions and the unions defended her. But it shouldn't have to be like that. And it really leaves a very nasty taste in the mouth because you end up demoralized and thinking, what am I doing?
Well, it's totally wrong, isn't it? It's obviously completely wrong. It just shouldn't happen.
Shouldn't
What
happen.
else can you say?
But it's all about money, and and that's why the litigation goes up. If you talk to, I mean, you have interviewed Dr. Martin Pittman. He was very clearly calling out things that were happening within midwifery and short staffing. I think, one of the things he said to me was I would be listing women for an elective cesarean section and then coming in ready to do the elective section and being told, oh, you can't do it because we don't have enough midwives.
Yeah.
But that is then he's made the clinical judgment that that mother and baby need to be delivered, but his clinical judgment is being put under pressure because he can't do what he needs to do in order to make sure that mother and baby are safe and well because there wasn't enough midwives to do a cesarean section.
Mm.
And you only have to look. I mean, we've got all these inquiries now. We've got Amos, Baroness Amos. We've got Donna Ockenden. Wes Streeting said on Channel 4 News talking about Oxford that he's going to head that up himself. I don't have a clue how he's going to do that.
Yeah.
He's not a physician. He's not a neonatologist. To my knowledge, he doesn't have any relevant medical experience. He's an MP and he's going to head up the Oxford inquiry. It's unbelievable. And I don't even know how Baroness Amos is going to do her inquiries.
Yeah.
Needs completely re-looking at all these inquiries and how they're going to do them. And you also have to remember that all these inquiries have not come because the hospitals are calling them out, even though their litigation rates are going through the roof. It's come from parents who've been harmed and traumatized. And that in itself is wrong.
Yes, I agree. So let's talk about the executives on the unit. So this is always a bone of contention with many people. Let's ask you this question first. Well, I think we may have discussed this previously, but could they have done anything differently on the unit in terms of the way it was managed? Not talking about Lucy now. We've established the unit didn't function very well. They have to be partly responsible for that. What could they have done differently, or should they have done anything differently?
Well, the managers inherited a unit that had been downgraded and the staff had been replaced with nurses. So Tony Chambers, I think, came in 2012 and all those changes had happened under Peter Herring. You have to remember, Peter Herring came with his own agenda as the chief executive because he came in 2000 to make Chester a foundation trust. It was one of the first foundation trusts in the country. And then in 2012, he left and went to Shrewsbury. And then in 2015, he left and he went to Nottingham. Well, you just need to join up the dots and look at what happened in Shrewsbury and Nottingham. So in fairness to Tony Chambers, he inherited a unit that had been downgraded and the staff had been replaced. And I think for a long time, they coasted. Everything was relatively stable, 2 to 3 neonatal deaths a year, nothing untoward. But as with anything, when you look at plane crashes or train crashes, it's never one thing that has gone wrong. It all comes together to be the perfect storm. So the consultants got this idea it was Lucy, and they pointed the finger. I think these managers, Alison Kelly, Karen Rees, Ariane Powell, Ian Harvey with the medical team, Tony Chambers, all did the right thing. They listened to the consultants' concerns. They brought in the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health to investigate. They called in Jane Howden to look at the cases. They talked to one of the consultants from Liverpool. The problem was that the medics, Dr. Breary and Dr. Jairam, they were not happy with what these managers were doing. I actually think these managers behaved very well. They did listen. It's been completely wrongly reported that they weren't listening to the consultants. And it was the consultants who said, oh, we weren't being listened to, because what they were hearing was not what they wanted to hear. So they kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it until the police were called. And then you've got to remember, 3 days before Operation Hummingbird was formally launched, the police were saying, well, there's nothing to see here. There's nothing wrong. And then Steve Breary and Ravi went to the police and obviously told them such a story that then Operation Hummingbird was launched. And I think the managers have been wrongly called out, because I don't know what else they were supposed to do. They did listen to these consultants. They did take their concerns seriously. It just wasn't the right thing that the consultants wanted to hear.
Yes.
So they kept.
So let's talk about, I mean, you've kind of just discussed this already, but there's the situation with Lucy, obviously, that's a kind of side issue. So there's a question here about whether they handled this professionally and adequately, or could they have been dealt with differently. So I'll give my view on this, because I can actually comment on this as well. So I think they actually handled it pretty well. It was a difficult situation because they're stuck between a rock and a hard place and have to manage the nurses and the nursing team and the pediatric team. And it's clear there's a division between the two. I think perhaps one thing that should have been dealt with differently is there should have been more transparency with regard to what Lucy being told why she was taken off the unit. So what do you think, Michelle?
Oh, if you read the transcripts from Thirlwall of Karen Rees and Alison Kelly, they were both horrified that Lucy had been kept in the dark. They knew more than Lucy, and Lucy was the person being accused. There was a lot of rumour mills. We know that because Jim McCormack, as I said previously, stood up at the meeting and pointed the finger at Ariane. It was not open and transparent at all. Lucy, in fairness, when she did get to find out, took out a grievance, and the grievance was upheld. But again, that probably really just made the consultants more angry, because yet again, Lucy's grievance has been upheld. So they felt, I mean, I don't know, I wasn't there, but they probably felt, oh, everybody's believing her and nobody's listening to us, because they really had this idea in their head that something untoward was happening. The things I don't understand that have come out of Thirlwall is that when Lucy was removed and her grievance was going on, it's obvious that Steve Breary in particular just wanted Lucy gone. And if Lucy had left and handed in her notice at that point, I personally don't think they would have called the police in, because their problem had disappeared. But then if you really think you've got a serial killer on your unit, why would you be happy if that serial killer's moved on to another hospital? That just doesn't make sense to me. And I think they knew that. I don't know. it's like a traditional witch hunt, isn't it? It's like it's her, and then things grow, and the rumor mill starts, and it became an absolute witch hunt. And the medics were siding with the medics, and the nurses were trying to defend Lucy. But only really Ariane and probably maybe Yvonne Farmer knew what was going on. The rest of the nurses were completely kept in the dark. In fact, many of them that I'm in contact with didn't realize the extent of the potential charges until Lucy actually was arrested and charged.
Mm. Yeah. It must be, it's hard to imagine, but it must have been such a horrible situation because you feel so powerless to do anything. And I think it's ironic that this Netflix trailer that we've seen, it's just only lasts for a couple of minutes, but Lucy makes this comment to police as things were just spiraling out of control. And that's what it's like. It's like you're just knowing that you're innocent, but no one will listen to you, and you can't control what the people are doing. It just must be awful. I mean,
Yeah.
Lord only knows the psychological impact this has had on her. It
And
just,
you've got to remember that Steve Breary and Ravi were digging for evidence against Lucy. They weren't digging for evidence against anybody else. They were specifically looking to point the finger at her. And it's the way that they drew up the roster chart. Ariane is on record as saying she was very upset when that roster chart was sent to the executive office because lots of people's names, including the doctors, had been removed.
hmm,
So it only had the babies on that were on the indictment. It didn't have the other 10 babies on that had also tragically passed away. And if you talk to the statisticians, they say that roster chart is just a work of fairy tale. You
hmm,
know, you draw anything up to make it look as if somebody is there all the time. But the reality is very different.
hmm,
And that's what
absolutely.
Lucy, she was in a job she loved. She was full time. She was working extra shifts. So statistically, she was on the unit more than, say, a nurse who only works 15 hours a week. She was removed off the job that she loved. She wasn't properly informed. Eventually, she was told, and she took out a grievance, which was upheld. She was told, and her friends were all told, you can't contact her, you can't mix with her. She was very isolated. They didn't realize the extent of what was going on until she was actually charged. Then, when she was charged, she was sent to prison for 2 years. She was 27 at this point, 28, very young. I, I can't imagine the police raiding my house, waking me up, handcuffing me, taking me to prison, then throwing me in prison for 2 years before I even get to trial.
Hmm,
She's no wonder she's traumatized. I'm traumatized at just the thought of it.
hmm. It is awful when you see the footage as well. Just really upsetting.
It's
I said,
like a whole.
even if you're just in bed and someone breaks into your bedroom, that would be fairly scary in and of itself.
I mean, people on social media have said, "Oh, well, she didn't say when they broke into her bedroom from the trailer. Oh, why is she here?" Well, she did know why they were there because she'd been arrested before, and I think in total she was interviewed over 30 times, which in itself is very traumatizing. Um, can you imagine how you feel if you are innocent and
Hmm,
the police come in, they're arresting you, um, and you've done nothing wrong, and every time you say something, the prosecuting barrister just calls you out. I mean, actually, I think this Netflix film is going to completely backfire on Cheshire Police because it's obvious now that when Nick Johnson was cross-examining Lucy about what she was wearing when she was charged, Lucy was telling the truth. She
hmm,
was in her dressing gown. But Nick Johnson kept pushing, no, you were arrested and you were wearing a blue Lee Cooper tracksuit. Well, that was on one of the arrests, but not the arrest where she was charged, which was the one that Nick Johnson was asking her about. So Lucy was telling the truth. But Nick Johnson, I mean, and also, why would Nick Johnson want to call out in the trial what Lucy was wearing when she was arrested and charged? It's got nothing to do with what went on that unit. It's not evidence, it's nothing. But Nick Johnson weaponized that against her to say, well, you see, she's a liar. She's lying about her clothes. So what else are you going to lie about? I mean, if Nick Johnson came and questioned me, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast, let alone what I was wearing a week ago. So how was Lucy expected to remember what she was wearing? But in actual fact, she did, and she was telling the truth.
Yeah. I mean, what you could say is that she, she described what were traumatic events in court, but actually she'd been through even more traumatic events that she didn't even mention. Um, there can't be much more of a traumatic experience than just having someone burst into your bedroom at 6 o'clock in the morning, wake you up, and it's the police. And I noticed they get this big officer to stand over the top of her, to try and intimidate her. And then they get the female officers to like handcuff her and be all nicey nicey with her, and it's all done by design. Um, and yeah, I agree with you. And when we discussed this before we started, I think it will backfire on them because I think people will see all this footage. It doesn't look good for them, and I doubt they're going to have anything of substance to add to what they've said already. So I think it will backfire on them. But we'll just have to wait and see.
Like she'd been bailed for, I think it was at least a year, if not 18 months. She was living with her parents. Every week, to my knowledge, she had to go, or every fortnight, to the local police station to sign in. And she'd done that religiously. She was not a flight risk. They
No.
did not need to handcuff her when they arrested her. She would have just gone voluntarily. She'd always complied with everything they had said. She's not a hardened criminal like, I don't know, whoever, somebody who's really like Levi Belfield or somebody.
Mhm.
She wasn't away. She had complied with every one of their instructions. So the police were incredibly heavy-handed with a very young girl. And Ben Myers talks about before the start of the trial apparently was put back a week because she was so traumatized when they moved her from the prison Bronzefield to the prison in Wakefield that they didn't take any of her belongings with her. They didn't take her medication. And she was absolutely petrified. So they actually had to put the trial back a week while she calmed down and got her possessions. It's just cruel. It's insane. I know what she was accused of were heinous crimes, terrible crimes. But she was at that point innocent until proven guilty. She had not been to trial and they treated her appallingly.
Even if she's guilty, there's a degree of care that must occur. Um, and it's very clear. I mean, I was reading about this the other day, the first day of the trial, and what Ben Myers reported. And it's clear that Lucy wasn't just in a bit of a bad state. She was basically not compos mentis. She was unable to speak. She was profoundly traumatized. She was broken, absolutely broken. And you've got to remember, this is an intelligent woman. Everyone agrees that she's intelligent, and she couldn't speak.
Who, probably comes from a very quiet family. Her parents are reportedly older. Um, I can't even. I mean, even now, the thought of the police coming in and treating me like that would traumatize me. I cannot imagine how I would have reacted at the age of 28, 29. It's beyond inhumane, and I think the police. I mean, and the police also. Why are they giving all this footage to Netflix? Why? That just stinks to me. But then a lot of the things the police have done, why did they employ a media company? Why were they buying themselves hummingbird necklaces and patting themselves on the back? That's taxpayers' money. They shouldn't be doing any of that.
I don't,
And
I
these
don't, I don't think they should even release that film. Now, obviously, that film is crap. We know that, but even if they'd made a good film, it's like why are you releasing what is basically a PR film that you've spent money to make, presumably? Like, if the media want to talk to you, talk to the media. That's why the media exists, so you can be accountable to the media. Don't make your own film that must have cost money to make, just saying, "Oh, we're great. We did a really hard investigation. It was really difficult on us." We don't care. It's your job. Like, no one's interested. And I think that's completely wrong. Obviously, I'm glad they made it because it's full of absolute, it gives a lot of useful information, but I just don't think it should be made in the first place.
And I don't think that the police should be giving interview footage of a person, whether convicted or not, to streaming platforms and TV programs. I actually think they should seek the consent of the person because it's not their interviews. Those interviews are actually Lucy's interviews. Lucy was the one being interviewed, not them. Where's the informed consent there for Lucy to
Mm,
agree? If I was Lucy, I probably would have given consent because it proves she was telling the truth.
mm.
There is the flip side where they're not the police interviews, they are Lucy's interviews. And we have to change the whole system of how the police and the judiciary handle these really complex cases and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of surprising in a way that Mark McDonald has reported that she's made something of recovery and that she has hope. And we hear these reports, we don't know if they're true or not, that she's working in the library and she's trying to, she's adapting and she seems to be in a better psychological state than she could easily be a lot worse off than she is based on the way she's been treated. So I suppose that's a good thing, but overall, it's, yeah, awful.
A prison. And I mean, you did a marvelous interview with Tom Hayes, but when you talk to Tom, and he's a bloke, he's not a young girl, how traumatized he was from his imprisonment being in Belmarsh, which is another category A prison, and what you witness, Tom will never be the same. And I have no doubt that when Lucy is exonerated, it's going to take years to for her to build up trust or I cannot imagine the trauma that poor girl has been through and continues to go through. She's in a category, whether she's the librarian or not, and we don't know. That could be just something that somebody's made up to sell a story to a tabloid.
Mm.
It's immaterial. Her liberty has been removed and she's been convicted of crimes that potentially she has not done.
Mm. Absolutely.
And
Let's talk about something medical from the court case. So, question here is, how did Dr. Evans get away with saying a lack of fluids for hours in the case of child A would have a minimal effect? Lucy Letby described the baby as being jittery, a sign of hypoglycemia, a dangerous condition in a neonate. That is just another example of him being allowed to misrepresent the facts in order to support Lucy Letby's guilt. So, do you have any comments on that, Michelle?
again, it goes back to this whole trial fiasco. He was not challenged. He was not challenged at all. None of them, the experts were. Ben Myers tried to cross-examine them, but there was actually no medical experts. They were the medical experts. If you go back to the beginning of the trial, Ben Myers said to Judge Goss, I want to defend every single baby after the prosecution has given their evidence. So it would have been baby A prosecution, baby A defense. But Judge Goss didn't allow that. So for 10 months, all you had was baby A prosecution, baby B prosecution, baby C prosecution, etc. for 10 months, and Ben Myers tried to cross-reference it. And I think by the time he got to the end of the 10 months, obviously he'd made the decision not to call Mike Hall for whatever reason. But that's all the jury heard. They did not hear, defence experts at all. And at the very end, they didn't hear defence experts. Now, one of the theories why Ben Myers didn't call Mike Hall was because he couldn't face another 10 months of going through every single baby with his experts defending them. Ben Myers at the time was also chairing, I got told, a committee looking at how to reduce the length of trials. Well, he's already been there for 10 months. Did he want to go through another 10 months in view of the fact that he's chairing a committee trying to look at how to reduce the length of trials? It's the whole thing is just, you just couldn't make it up, could you?
No.
So I think Darry Evans was unchallenged. He was allowed to say whatever he wanted, and nobody was there to contradict him. And when Ben Myers did try and contradict him, he was very assertive in his, oh, you're wrong, I'm the doctor, I know better than you. And that's what the jury heard.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about obstetrics. I've had Martin Pittman on to discuss this, and he has questioned, as many of us have, why obstetrics featured so little in the court case. So I was just wondering if you could expand on this and explain the role of obstetrics, what dealings you would have had with them when you worked on the unit, and so on.
Well, you have to remember that I have trained as a midwife, so I have a level of understanding of obstetrics. As we talked about before, nurse training has changed quite dramatically, so they don't have midwives on neonatal units anymore. So that could compound the lack of knowledge of the importance of what happens antenatally on these babies. We know that Dr. Evans to the police said, oh, we don't need to get the obstetric notes because he's so knowledgeable on every subject, he knows everything about everything. But whatever happens to a baby from the point of conception to the point of delivery has a profound impact on the state the baby's born in, whether they have conditions, the delivery, so many different aspects. So obstetrics is vitally important in the care of these babies, these neonatal babies. Absolutely vital. And it was a massive omission not to have an obstetrician involved, not to look at the maternity notes. Mark MacDonald is now trying to rectify that with the CCRC. He has a number of obstetricians and fetal medicine obstetricians trying to glean as much information as they can from the baby's notes. I believe that Mark has asked the CCRC to apply for the maternity notes, and the CCRC, from my understanding, has the right to do that. I don't think they have done that up to the present moment, but Mark has asked them. Hopefully we will get the maternity notes, and I think once we get the maternity notes, it will be very clear why some of these babies were so sick. I mean, we do know that some of them were seriously sick, like baby C, antenatally. We know that there was poor obstetric care. If you look at baby D, whose mum had rupture membranes for 60 hours and didn't receive antibiotics, and the baby, when the baby was born, didn't receive antibiotics for at least 4 hours, which was a second failing. So it's phenomenal that nobody asked for the maternity notes. But again, it was Dr. Darry Evans who said, I mean, there's emails come out via Thirlwall where he's very clearly said to the police, oh, we don't need the obstetric notes. It's all about how you sell a story. And that was another failure. They should have had a multidisciplinary team saying, we need this, we need that, we need the other. Steve Watts is very clear on that, but they didn't follow the protocols and guidelines.
It was made pretty easy for them because they were told what to do, and they also it's not as if it just drifted away. Obviously, it shouldn't drift away, but they're talking about it several times, and then Dr. Evans says, "Oh, just don't bother doing that," and then they just go, "Oh, fine." It's staggering. It's truly staggering.
in fairness to the police, at one point, they did instruct Jane Hutton, the
Hmm.
statistician. But then, I mean, unbelievably, the CPS said, "Oh, she's asking too many questions. Don't employ her." So the police had failings in how they investigated, but the CPS didn't help the situation, and Dowie Evans definitely did not help the situation.
Hmm. I think it's fair to note that the police did that, but even that was quite late in the day when they finally got a statistician, and they still hadn't got they allowed, we know now, they basically allowed Dr. Evans to appoint the other professionals as well. Um, so it's a pretty incredible, really. But I want to ask you something about the medical picture. So I just want to put this to you. So is it Apgar? Do you pronounce those things as Apgar scores? Yeah.
Was developed by, I think it was Dr. Apgar actually, and
Mm.
they monitor when a baby is born. You give them a score out of 10. So when a baby's born vigorous and screaming, they score 10 out of 10. If they only score 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10, you know that baby is not well. Interestingly, Dr. Ravi Jairam in, I think it was August 2025, could have been 24, was being interviewed by the Birth Trauma Association, and they talked about Apgars. Now, this is a consultant pediatrician, and when I listened to his interview, I nearly fell off the chair because he very clearly says to this lady, who's the head of the Birth Trauma Association, when she's talking about Apgars, "Oh, well, you only record 4 things." Well, that's completely untrue. There's 5 things you record. And he said, "They're not relevant anymore and we hardly ever use them," which is a blatant lie. In fact, as a midwife, you cannot register a birth on most 100% computer systems without putting in what the Apgar scores are. Why on earth would he say that Apgars are hardly ever used? And and he also got the readings wrong. He said there was only 4 things you look at, when in actual fact there's 5 things.
I mean,
So
Apgar is an acronym of the five things, isn't it?
um, I'm not sure about that. I thought
I thought it
Apgar was,
was.
but you could be right. I mean, I can't remember now. You could be right. It's about airway, heart rate, tone, color, and hang on, I can't remember
When
now.
I've seen it written down, it's like, hold on, like activity, pulse, grimace, appearance, respiration.
5 things, and tone, and tone. Um, So, yeah, I don't know why he would say that Apgars are not relevant, and they're not perfect because they're quite subjective to the person who's recording them, but they are indicative of the state that a baby is born in.
Hmm. So,
So,
how do you feel about the accuracy of the Apgar scores for these infants? Because when I look at them, um, it doesn't seem to reflect the state that some of these infants were born in.
but Apgars are only about the time of birth and 5 minutes of age.
Right.
If you take baby D, I think he had quite good APGAR scores, but he slowly did over the 4 hours because he had an infection. So they are only indicative of the state you are born in. They're not indicative of what's going to happen down the line. They just give you a guide. So if you have a baby who's born with an APGAR of 1, you need to be quite intense in your resuscitation at that moment in time of that baby.
Hmm.
But it doesn't mean that that baby, even if it comes out with an APGAR of 10, is going to be fine, because something babies in a 24 hours or 6 hours or even a week later, cardiac babies will often collapse at 4 or 5 days, but they've been fine up until then. So it's a scoring system just to tell you what state that baby's in, but it's not a long-term indication of what's going to happen to that baby or how that baby is. But there's still it's a valuable tool, and it can be, if you've got a baby with an Apgar of 1, the chances are that baby's going straight to the neonatal unit.
Mm.
But 24 hours be absolutely fine and be okay. It's just depends what's caused it.
Yeah. So when we see people saying, "Oh, the Apgar scores were respectable," or whatever it may be, really that's not relevant to their later collapses and their later deterioration, or it maybe has some relevance but limited relevance. Is that a fair comment?
I mean, you can have babies at term who come out very vigorous. Their Apgars are 9 and 10 at 5. They're absolutely fine. But then, certainly with congenital heart babies, if when their duct closes, usually on day 3 to 5, they can suddenly collapse in a heap. So that's why, I mean, if you talk to parents, they'll say, well, he was fine. What happened? And it's because some mechanism has changed physiologically um, to impact on that baby's health.
Mm. Yeah.
And things like that. I mean, I've just said about a duct closing on a baby with a congenital heart defect, but there's a million variations on a theme. It's not always obvious when a baby is born tragically with a genetic condition that they have a genetic condition that is going to be life limiting. Sometimes that doesn't become apparent until they're 6 months of age or a year of age.
Mm. Yeah, well, that's all very interesting. And then there's a kind of follow-up question about obstetrics. I don't want you to comment on the first bit, but I'll read it out anyway. Stephen very seems to be hell-bent on covering for obstetrics as much as he is for himself. I suspect it isn't out of loyalty to them, but they may know about whether he was a good doctor or not, and so on. So I don't want you to comment on that. Do we know anything about? So I'm going to just answer this firstly, briefly. Do we know anything about the dynamic between obstetrics and paediatrics at the Council of Chester? So I'm just going to say that I know a bit because I've spoken to someone from the hospital, and that's in my book, but I can't say any more about that at this point in time. Um, what do you think, Michelle? Would you have any comments on this?
Going back to when we had, and I'm one of them, we had a number of midwives who worked on the neonatal unit. That system, because the nurse training and the midwifery training has changed so much, doesn't happen anymore. So, and also in Chester, there was a change in the umbrella that they put these directives. So maternity and neonatal pediatrics used to be all under the same hospital directive. But I was told during about 2013, maternity was put under the planned care directive, and the neonatal unit was put under the urgency care directive, which meant that there was a breach in communication and actions, and people were going to different meetings, whereas we used to have joint meetings. There was a split. I don't understand why they did that. I suspect it was probably because of jiggling costs and accounts. Certainly, if you look at Thirlwall and you read Caroline Benyon's or Caroline Oakley's statement, some of the nurses, they say that there was very little communication between labour ward and the neonatal unit, which should never happen. There should be really good communication between those two, because the neonatal unit needs to know, is there potentially a baby being born premature? Is there a multiple birth? All those sorts of things. And I think it was Caroline Benyon said, even when we used to go through and say, look, we're full, we can't take any more babies, there was a reluctance on the part of the obstetrics to ship the mothers and babies out. So there should be really good communication between obstetrics and neonates. I think in Chester at that point in time, for a whole host of reasons, the communication was not good and there was definitely issues. There was probably issues because of costings. The maternity side didn't want to ship mothers out because then they weren't being paid for looking after that mother. Yeah, lots and lots of different issues. And it was a contributing factor to some of the failures that happened with these babies.
Mm. So you mentioned issues about shipping babies out of the hospital. So there's this, I don't know how well known this is, but there's a Guardian article from 2018 where a mother of an infant at the hospital describes Lucy fighting for her to have her infant transferred to tertiary hospital. Obviously not the act of someone that wants the baby to die. Obviously, an example of good practice. Is this though? I spoke to someone the other
What
day about. Sorry, go on.
2018, because Lucy wasn't on the unit in
No,
2018.
no, sorry. The Guardian article was published in 2018. Yeah. Um, so I spoke to someone the other day about this, and they sort of said, um, this is could Lucy saying, right, we need to transfer this baby out of our hospital. It needs to go to tertiary unit, and she fought for the parent. The parent was very complimentary of her in this article. Is that something that could have, been held against her, or may not been viewed favorably? Do you think?
Um, it shouldn't have been. It definitely should not have been held against her. I don't know, because these consultants obviously had some sort of issue with Lucy. Otherwise, I don't think they would have pointed the finger. There are occasions when nurses and doctors disagree, but we should all respect our particular views and experiences. That doesn't always happen, and especially with some consultants. I once got into a big argument with a consultant because I was convinced that a baby that we'd admitted had trisomy 21. And I wanted that baby to have genetic testing. And the consultant was, no, that's not necessary. And we got into quite a heated discussion. In fairness to him, he did in the end say, okay, Michelle, you take the bloods and send them off for genetic testing. But I don't think they're necessary. And fortunately for me, I was vindicated because the baby did have trisomy 21 and he apologized. But I was very experienced and I can stand my ground. A lot of other people can't do that. They don't have the level of knowledge, they don't have the experience. And you get some consultants who they're consultants. They don't want to listen or be heard. I don't know about that particular occasion. I don't know which baby it was. I don't know what went on. But all I can say is that, was it another reason where Lucy was showing that she actually was supporting the parents and going against a consultant? And that's another reason why they pointed the finger. I don't know. I don't even know which consultant it was. So who knows? I mean, there's so many things in this case, and the only thing I will say is that it's completely obvious that the consultants, for whatever reason, particularly Steve Breary and Ravi, John Gibbs eventually came on board, got this idea that something malicious was going on in the unit, and it was Lucy. And only they can answer why they felt that. I've never heard a satisfactory report. I've watched their interviews after the trial, and they say, oh, it was a gut feeling. But I don't think that's good enough to convict somebody and to put this poor girl through what they've put through.
Absolutely.
Because they never looked at They never, I mean, that's blatantly obvious. They never ever did self-reflect.
No, I mean in one of the it's one of the Daily Mail podcasts where they interview John Gibbs. He claims that they did try to look at things on the unit, but it seems to me that must have been a pretty limit. I don't even know if I believe that, to be honest. But he claimed that they did try and look at themselves. But I don't, it's clear they didn't do that to a satisfactory degree, isn't it? Um,
To see in this Netflix documentary because John Gibbs is filmed in it.
mm,
Now, time scale of when they filmed John Gibbs, of whether they filmed him immediately after the trials, in which case he will definitely be pro guilty,
mm.
adamant that and that they've all been vindicated, or whether they filmed him further down the line with, as Lady Justice Thirlwall said, all this noise going on. I have heard that he's a very tortured soul now,
Mm.
and he's questioning lots of things. He's not questioned things enough to actually go back to the police or contact Mark MacDonald, which I think he should.
You should. I mean, you should do it now.
His conscience should. Um, but we shall see. It'd be interesting to see what this Netflix documentary is actually going to. But again, we don't know when he was filmed, so
No.
they tell us.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see. The chronology of a lot of things is not clear at this point, but hopefully it'll become clearer. So let me just ask you one question to finish. We've kind of touched upon this already, but it'd be interesting if you have anything to add. So someone mentions that the state of midwifery has been awful nationally for ages. Obviously, I can't comment on that. This is just this person's opinion. How has this not been addressed, or are there reasons why it hasn't been addressed, in your opinion?
Well, again, I think it's multifactorial. It's midwives being very short-staffed. You've got to remember that as a midwife, when you're on labour ward, if you're looking after one mother, you're actually looking after potentially two people, or maybe three or four if it's twins or triplets. If you've got two mothers, then you're immediately looking after four and maybe five and six people. And most of those people you can't actually see. So you have to have a lot of skills to detect whether the baby is becoming distressed.
Hmm.
If you're short staffed, it becomes increasingly pressurized. Midwifery, the training has changed. I personally feel that one of the big mistakes was when they went to direct entry midwifery, because although they increased the length of the training to 3 years for a direct entry midwife, previously midwives would have had 3 years training as a registered nurse, more than likely had a couple of years as a staff nurse, and then done a 18-month postgraduate. So by that time, a midwife would have had at least 6 or 7 years training, as opposed to training, which is what happens now. So I think that the training has changed things. There has been a number of policies implemented where midwives have been encouraged to really aim for normal deliveries. And that's a great thing to do, but it should never be forgotten that not every woman can achieve a normal delivery. Labour is complicated, things happen, things go wrong, and you must always be conscious of that. So, again, with all these things, it's never one thing, it's multifactorial, and they all come together to create the perfect storm. And that's why maternity units are in absolute crisis. It's not just one thing, it is a whole host of things.
Okay. Well, that's a very good answer. I can't comment on any of that. I'll just take your word for it. So that's absolutely brilliant, Michelle. Thanks for joining us again today. We've done a good hour and a half, so we'll leave it there. Um, we've still got a few questions left, and so much is going to happen in the next few weeks. We'll no doubt speak again soon. So thank you very much as always for sharing your time and expertise, and we'll catch up again soon, no doubt.
For having me. So, yes, we'll wait and see what this Netflix documentary is like.
Yeah, can I just remind people when this goes out, that will already have happened. So we don't, at this point in time, we haven't seen it. Because I've done so many interviews, I've recorded so many recently, and so much has happened. I don't know when it's going to go out, but it's very likely to go out after Netflix documentary. So just bear in mind that we've only seen the trailer at this point.
Recognizing that this is potentially the biggest miscarriage of justice the UK's ever had. So I'm really pleased for you personally and to thank you for facilitating all these people calling it out. Because
Yeah.
without people, would poor Lucy would be incarcerated for another 20 years.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I mean, when I started on this journey, if you want to describe it that way, I realized I needed to get in contact with people, and it's gone beyond what I thought was possible. So I'm really privileged to be in this position, and you know, I just know that I need to give it everything I've got until we get her out. It's as simple as that. So, I mean, I'm so grateful that I'm in contact with people like yourself, so many other people who are all brilliant, and it's a real privilege. And I just do the best that I can. That's what we all do, isn't it? Really. So yeah, thank you. And I mean, it's great to do these interviews. And we'll do another one soon, no doubt.
You take care.
Yeah, you too. Take care. See you again.